That's what his name means, hidden and revealed. Y'all always not stuck on, I didn't hear the right syllables. So your child that's handicapped can't speak, I guarantee you they know who mom and dad is. They know the food he eats and she eats. They know how they dress, how they smell, when they do this and when they do that. And that child knows your name, even though they can't articulate one sound. They might go, I took care of kids that way. And Yahweh walkers beat each other up over a name sound. And Yahweh say, what about my character? What about what I do with my hands and my mind? And I was a chief one. I was telling people, you're not in the walk because you say Yahweh. You say Yahuwah, whatever case may be. You know, I sat in that chair and was, I didn't want to go there.
But most people stick to one name, right?
But do they stick to Yahweh's character?
Well,
that's where it's at. That's where it's at.
God.
It's the function.
It's the function of his
Yahweh.
name. And we're stuck. And remember, the word that says don't mention the name of any mighty ones is the word Zakar. And the word Zakar means I stand for someone and something. So when you drive a Saturn, because some Yahweh walkers says, you're driving a Saturn? And you can say, I do not walk in the function of Saturn. I walk in the function of Yahweh. That's what you got to set. Well, yeah, but Daniel lived in Nebuchadnezzar's house. He didn't walk in the function of Nebuchadnezzar. And even the name that he gave, he didn't walk in the function of that name either. He was called him by that name, but he didn't act in the function of that name. So it's all about character and function. It's not even an issue. We say okay, it's not even on, they don't say okay, I'm walking in the function. We get this thing, is it okay? They always like, just walk in the function. So Zakar, when he said don't mention the name, it says don't act in the character of Saturn. Don't act in the character of, what other things that are called by pagan names? Hugo? Shungo, who's Shungo? Oh, but anyway, you know what we're saying, you know, or Nike. I'm wearing Nike shoes and I'm walking in Torah. I'm in the Feast of Tabernacles. I'm not acting in all the frivolity that Nike does. That's, you know. And in chapter 39, verse 26, and they shall borne their shame and all their trespass they committed against me when they dwelt safely in their own land with none to make them afraid. And when I brought them back from the peoples and gathered them out of the lands of their enemies, and I shall be set apart in them before the eyes of many nations. And they shall know that I'm Yahweh, their Elohim, who sent them into exile among the nations, and then gathered them back to their own land, and left none of them behind. Left none of them behind. I was in the Air Force, but the Marines had the thing, we leave nobody behind. And we in the Air Force, we practice the same thing. Yahweh does it even better than anybody. He knows where all the dead bodies are. He knows where all the live bodies are. And he brings them all to the promised land. So if you lived in Chicago or Africa or Antarctica, whatever case may be, Yahweh has given you a new home. Well, I don't want to live there. Yahweh's like, too late. He says, Shem, I put you over here. Shem. And then when we got into the temple, because there's a temple during the millennium, and Yahweh sets up his priesthood. And remember, we read and recounted how he dismissed the Levites to do a lesser job, and he gets the Levites of who? Zadok, which is coming from the great-grandfather called Pincus, or we know him as Phineas. And he puts a spirit through the belly of Zimri and Cosby. You notice in the belly? Because their lifestyle, their birth waters of death. They're two high-ranking children of their fathers and mothers doing a religious sexual act in the camp of Israel. And if you remember, Pincus, one of his jobs is the guard. He's the chief guard of making sure things unset apart doesn't invade the camp. And he did his job. Jew. Just like that. And to Yahweh, that's tov. To the world, that's immoral. See, Yahweh doesn't have morality. He has tov. Either it's in his function or it's in dysfunction. In our world, oh, it's immoral. You can't circumcise the child. That's called genital mutilation. Let them get older and decide. I'm talking like James. I don't want to talk like that. What is this? This kind of gives you kind of takes you back to the roots. But anyway,
okay.
we're counting in chapter 40 where Yahweh relives and rebuilds the temple on a greater grandeur. And we talked about the prince. What the prince is, we talked about with the chapter 40. That 44? Oh yeah, 44:1. Here's the prince, which is the same as Messiah. He says, and he brought me to the back of our gate and set apart place, the faces east, and it was shut. This is the temple. And Yahweh said to me, this gate is shut, and it is not open, and no one enters it, because Yahweh Elohim of Israel has entered in by it. Oh my dear. Yahweh enters the set apart place through a gate that nobody can go in but him. Yahweh is there, Yahweh Shema. And that Yahweh is Yeshua. He's living in the temple of Yahweh.
Hallelujah.
In the millennium. Literally in there.
Hallelujah.
The Father's not even there, folks. I don't know what that means. I don't have the calculation for that. But I know that 7 lights come out of one bright light called white light. I know that there's 7 spirits of one spirit in the menorah. I know out of 1 river comes 4 rivers. I know out of the fruit comes 9 fruit. And it's all over the place. And out of 1 mother, she has a bunch of kids. And it goes on, he says, and the prince, as a prince, he sits in it to eat bread. Well, who can that be? Yahweh himself. He's the Sar. And then you have a Sarah, which is who you are. Sar and Sarah. So we go through this, and then we read all through here, and then we went to the part about the special thing. It says in verse 5, it says, and Yahweh said to me, son of man, set your heart and see what your eyes see, and hear with your ears, and all that I say concerning all the laws of the house of Yahweh. And the Torah is still in effect. And he says, and you shall set your heart to the entrance of the house, with all the exits and all set apart place. And you shall say to the rebellious and to the house of Israel, thus says the Master Yahweh, O house of Israel, enough of all your abomination of yours, that you brought in sons of foreigners that were uncircumcised in heart and in flesh, to be in my set apart place to profane it. My house. Remember, he uses the blood to clean his house. That's what the blood's used for. Then you brought near my food and fat and blood, and you broke my covenant because of all your abominations. You did not guard the charge of what the set apart place to me, but you have set others to guard the charge of my set apart place. Thus says the Master Yahweh. He says, no son of a foreigner, uncircumcised in heart or uncircumcised in flesh, comes into my temple, who is among the children of Israel. And the Levites who went far from me when Israel went astray, who strayed away from me with their idols and their crookedness, and they were attendants to my set apart place as gatekeepers in all the slaughterings and burnt offerings, because they attended to them before the idols and became a stumbling block and crookedness to the house of Israel. I had lifted my hand in the oath against them, declares Yahweh, for they bear their crookedness and do not serve me as my priest, nor come to any of that which is set apart, nor to the most set apart place. But they shall bear their shame and their abominations which they have done, yet I shall make those who guard the duty of the house for all its work and for all it has done. But the priests, the Levites, the son of Zadok, they do the guard duty and so forth. And we went all through that, how that they are observing the days of unleavened bread, and has a nickname called Passover. Then he says they also takes them all to the last holiday, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. So he gives you the bookends, unleavened bread and tabernacles, because unleavened bread's a hog, Passover isn't. Shavuot's a hog, trumpets isn't. Tabernacle is a hog, Feast of Yom Kippurim is not a hog. There's only 3 hogs, and we're not talking the ones that root around on the ground either. Then he says, and remember, when he says the 14th, it's the back end of the 14th, because you'll see the same typology of writing in Exodus chapter 12 and 13, talking about Passover, starting on the 14th. But it's the back end of the 14th, if you know how the calendar is reckoned, because every evening has 2 days. Has one day and has the other day. But Yahweh uses that type of language to test and gives you tension to see how Yahweh walkers act, because the pattern is there. So he continues on. He talks about all the priesthood duties, and then he gives you the same image he gives you in Revelation. he talks about this river that proceeds out of the gate, out of the threshing floor. What chapter is that? Oh yeah, here it is. He says, 47, and he turned me back to the door of the house, and look, water was flowing from under the threshold of the house towards the east. For the house faced east, and the water was flowing from under the right side of the house and from the south of the altar. And when he led me out by the way of the north gate, he took me around to the outside, to the outer gate facing east, and looked, water trickling out from the right side. As the man went out to the east with the line in his hand, he measured 1,000 cubits, and he made me to pass over into the water, and the water now is up to my ankles. And he measured 1,000 and made me pass over into the water to my knees. And he measured again, and it was to my loins. And he measured 1,000 streams, and I was unable to pass over, for the water had risen to where you had to swim a stream that is not able to be passed over. So when you go to Revelation chapter 21 and 22, you have this same image on a grander scale. And also in this chapter, on this river, you have palm trees and you have fruit. You can read that on verse 11. It says, 12, and by the banks of the stream on the both sides grow all kinds of trees used for food, whose leaves do not wither and fruit do not fail, and they bear their fruit every month, because their waters flow from the set apart place. And their fruit shall be for the food and for the health of the nations. And then you see this same image for the tomorrow's festival, which we'll get into on Revelation 21 and 22. This great day of tabernacles is a day where your relatives that you had hoped to be in the walk that never crossed over, or your ancient relatives that you never even knew that brought you forth by that baton of bearing you here. That day will be so great, and the rivers of living water that Yeshua talks about is a lot greater and more dynamic than what we were pretending to hear years ago. And that hope will not be lost. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.